Hello everybody, and I'm so sorry for giving you that other screen for a minute. I was just realizing as I was starting, sorry, I'm just going to move my microphone because it's in the wrong place, and I'm going to have to mute you for a moment while I adjust it, and then I'll talk to you. So just pretend I'm talking, okay? Just pretend. Right, back again. Sorry, I was just realising I may get a phone call where I have to go and take the phone call a bit later on, and I don't have a be right back screen or anything like that, but now I do. And I think it's working. We'll find out. Hopefully I don't get a phone call while I'm in the middle of talking to you. What are we doing? We have started reading Just William, and I had a good little description of Just William that I was writing up somewhere. Well, I edited up from something. I'm just going to find it, and read it to you, a little snippet from it. And I'll just see. Come on, little slow computer. Here we go. Just got so many. I use my computer to the max. Considering I don't do hardcore gaming, it gets a lot of hard work. Browsers usually have sort of like 20 or 30 tabs open, and I am using them. So when I go to stream, I have to save them. If they're not ones that I have been going backwards and forwards to, I have to save them to a folder and close them all so that it doesn't take quite so many resources from the computer and it's processing things, among other stuff. So if this pauses for a moment, don't panic. I will be back. Here we go. Where is it? William Brown's well-meaning efforts often result in unfortunate outcomes, getting him into trouble with his parents, although he can never see why. There's a more extensive description that I found online, which is quite good actually. William is unusual for stories of this era. Confident, strong-willed, independent-minded, with original world views. A born leader who is keen to be chief in any undertaking. He does not care about his clothes or appearance, wears a scowl as his best company manners, and hates small talk. He loves to play Red Indians and pirates and readily embarks on any project. William Brown is an 11-year-old schoolboy living in a country village in southern England. Somehow he always manages to get into trouble with his parents, although he can never see why. His well-meaning efforts often result in unfortunate outcomes. And having read some of these books when I was in my teens, yes, it's a very accurate description. The comment about it being unusual for stories of this era is quite accurate, though, because most of the books that were written for children, for this age group of children at the time, tended to be rather moralistic, as in the children start off bad behaved, learn by a series of incidents which the story is about, and have a change of heart and become lovely, sweet, looking after their granny type people. Not that they hate their granny or anything like that, but meeting the Victorian ideals of what these adults thought that these children should be like. Just William was written by a lady called Richmal Crompton, who didn't have children herself, but had a nephew, I think it was, and also had been a teacher at a piece of hair in behind my glasses, tickling the side of my face, had been a teacher at a girls' school. And so I'm guessing she was also a very accurate observer of human nature, especially human nature as found amongst children in the schoolyard. So yes, she seems to have appreciated the fact that a child of that age can actually have a very strong idea in their own mind of what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. What you'll find as we go along with reading the Just William stories is that generally William doesn't set out to be difficult or to get into trouble or do anything naughty. He thinks he's doing something good to help people. But the fact of the matter is that his idea of a situation is not necessarily what the situation actually is, as we found out in the very first story where we met him, where he thought his sister Ethel was sweet on this chap, when in actual fact Ethel knew the girl who the chap was sweet on and was giving him some advice about how to propose to her. So William decides he's going to help his sister to reel in this gentleman that she's obviously sweet on in William's eyes, and it goes a little awry. Anyway, so enough of that. We shall read the story. And I better introduce myself. For those of you who are new here, hi, I'm Jev, and I read old-fashioned children's stories of the sort that don't generally get written anymore these days. Some of them have ideas that we don't necessarily agree with these days. Some of them, it's just that the world that they were written in has long gone. The world from before the First World War. Sometimes it's just before the Second World War, but often they're before the First World War. And so the attitude of people, the way they lived their lives, the fact that so many more people didn't live in cities in those days, that they had to be a lot more reliant on the way you do things between each other in the village or on the farms or anything like that, all make up part of the story. Also, it was the flowering of imagination in a lot of ways for English literature for children, instead of it just being for adults. There were a lot of things starting to be written as stories for children, and so these are stories which a lot of the time people these days have no idea what they were like. And it's great in this day and age to actually have something outside of our current world and our current circumstances to listen to think about, to imagine. And yes, they're idealistic stories. They're not an accurate portrayal of what life was like necessarily. There will be aspects that are, but some of the books we read are much more fantasy-based. Anyway, so there you go. The only requirements I have is please make sure you have a drink of water or something to keep you hydrated with you. If you would like to, have something to snack on to keep you going. No, that's not actually mouldy bread. That's actually just the fact that the light at this angle makes my camera think it's green when in actual fact it's yellow. It's just the angle. It's garlic bread from the other night for dinner. So that's my snacks. Very yummy. So have something to eat with you, have something to drink with you, and somewhere comfortable to sit. Unless you have to be at work, in which case, if you can put your headphones on and listen, even if you can't actually do all those other things, then that's good. Hopefully we can help you pass the time and be amused. So here we go. Just a moment. I'm going to move my chair because it's drifted back a little too far. And then we shall carry on with reading. Unlock. Oh, just in case you're wondering, I use an iPhone. I don't have an iPhone. This is an iPad mini, first generation, and it still works, but only for books and finding books online. We shall carry on. So here we go. I've got my book in the right place. My microphone is in the right place. My camera's in the right place. My water's in the right place. I'm sitting in the... Okay, let's just read. Just William by Richmal, Crompton. Chapter 3, William Below Stairs. That's intriguing. And I'm going to grab my charge cable while I read. William was feeling embittered with life in general. He was passing through one of his not infrequent periods of unpopularity. Yes. Okay. The climax had come with the gift of sixpence bestowed on him by a timid aunt who hoped thus to purchase his goodwill. With the sixpence, so this is obviously a different occasion to when we started the book, because that was a different amount. With the sixpence he had bought a balloon adorned with the legs and head of a duck, fashioned in cardboard. This could be blown up to its fullest extent and then left to subside. It took several minutes to subside. It must have something keeping the neck of the balloon from being open too far. It took several minutes to subside, and during those minutes it emitted a long, drawn-out and high-pitched groan. You've done that, haven't you? Where you've made it work, where you blow up the balloon and then you pull the neck of the balloon and it goes and drives everyone batty. So it's a variation of that, but it's actually got something put in the balloon to make it do that. Long drawn-out, high-pitched groan. The advantage of this was obvious. William could blow it up to its fullest extent in private and leave it to subside in public, concealed beneath his coat. While this was going on, William looked around as though in bewildered astonishment. He inflated it before he went to breakfast. He then held it firmly and secretly, so as to keep it inflated till he was sitting at the table. Then he let it subside. His mother knocked over a cup of coffee and his father cut himself with the bread knife. In those days you didn't get pre-sliced bread. Ethel, his elder sister, indulged in a mild form of nervous breakdown. William sat with a face of startled innocence, but nothing enraged his family so much as William's expression of innocence. I think they've experienced it before. Not the balloon, the expression and what it means. They fell upon him and he defended himself as well as he could. Yes, he was holding the balloon under the table. Well, he'd blown it up some time ago. He couldn't keep it blown up forever. He had to let the air out sometime. He couldn't help it making a noise when the air went out. It was the way it was made. He hadn't made it. He set off to school with an air of injured innocence and the balloon. Observing an elderly and irascible-looking gentleman in front of him, he went a few steps down a back street, blew up his balloon, and held it tightly under his coat. Then, when abreast of the old gentleman, he let it off. The old gentleman gave a leap into the air and glared fiercely around. He glanced at the small, virtuous-looking schoolboy with obviously no instrument of torture at his lips, and then concentrated his glare of fury and suspicion on the upper windows. William hastened on to the next pedestrian. He had quite a happy walk to school. School was at first equally successful. William opened his desk, hastily inflated his balloon, closed his desk, then gazed round with his practised expression of horrified astonishment at what followed. He drove the French master to distraction. Step out, who makes the noise?" he screamed. No one stepped out, and the noise continued at intervals. The mathematics master finally discovered and confiscated the balloon. "I hope," said the father at lunch, "that they've taken away that infernal machine of yours." William goes to a school that's in the village or the town that they live in, and he goes home at lunchtime, unlike the sort of schools that I grew up at where it was a considerable drive on a school bus and there was only one vehicle in the family, and so therefore Dad had the car, Mum didn't, and so everybody, it was normal in the schools I went to actually stay at school to have your lunch, but you took lunch to school with you. Some of the schools in England, they provide lunch and you stay there for lunch. Otherwise, you go home and you have lunch at home. So that's, I think, what the story is with William here, but we'll carry on. So he's at home and his father's saying he hoped they confiscated it. William replied sadly that they had. He added that some people didn't seem to think it was stealing to take other people's things. "Then we may look forward to a little peace this evening," said his father politely. "Not that it matters to me, as I'm going out to dinner. The only thing that relieves the tedium of going out to dinner is the fact that for a short time one has a rest from William." I don't think his father really has the hang of what little boys are like, or remembers what it was like himself. William acknowledged the compliment by a scowl and a mysterious muttered remark to the effect that some people were always at him. During preparation in afternoon school, he read a storybook kindly lent to him by his next-door neighbour. It was not because he had no work to do that William read a storybook in preparation. Preparation is like homework that you do it at school. Prep. It was a mark of defiance to the world in general. It was also a very interesting storybook. It opened with the hero as a small boy, misunderstood and ill-treated by everyone around him. Then he ran away. He went to sea and in a few years made an immense fortune in the goldfields. He returned in the last chapter and forgave his family and presented them with a noble mansion and several shiploads of gold. The idea impressed William, all except the end part. He thought he'd prefer to have the noble mansion himself and pay rare visits to his family, during which he would listen to their humble apologies and perhaps give them a nugget or two, but not very much, certainly not much to Ethel. He wasn't sure whether he'd ever really forgive them. He'd have rooms full of squeaky balloons and trumpets in his house anyway, and he'd keep caterpillars and white rats all over the place too. Things they made such a fuss about in their old house. And he'd always go about in dirty boots, and he'd never brush his hair or wash, and he'd keep dozens of motor cars. And he wouldn't let Ethel go out in any of them. He was roused from this enthralling daydream by the discovery and confiscation of his storybook by the master in charge, and the subsequent fury of its owner. In order adequately to express his annoyance, he dropped a little ball of blotting paper soaked in ink down William's back. See. William, on attempting retaliation, was sentenced to stay in half an hour after school detention. He returned gloomily to his history book, upside down, and his misanthropic view of life. He compared himself bitterly with the hero of the storybook and decided not to waste another moment of his life in uncongenial surroundings. He made a firm determination to run away as soon as he was released from school. He walked briskly down the road away from the village. In his pocket reposed the balloon. He had made the cheering discovery that the mathematics master had left it on his desk, so he had joyfully taken it again into his possession. He thought he might reach the coast before night and get to the gold fields before next week. He didn't suppose it took long to make a fortune there. He might be back before next Christmas, and crumbs, he'd jolly well make people sit up. He wouldn't go to school for one thing, and he'd be jolly careful who he gave nuggets to for another. He'd give nuggets to the butcher's boy, and the postman, and the man who came to tune the piano, and the chimney sweep. He wouldn't give any to any of his family or any of the masters at the school. He'd just serve people out the way they served him. He just would. The road to the coast seemed rather long, and he was growing rather tired. He walked in a ditch for a change, and then scraped through a hedge and took a short cut across a ploughed field. Dusk was falling fast, and even William's buoyant spirits began to flag. The fortune part was all very well, but in the meantime he was cold and tired and hungry. He hadn't yet reached the coast, much less the gold fields. Something must be done. He remembered that the boy in the story had begged his way to the coast. William determined to beg his, but at present there seemed nothing to beg it from, except a hawthorn hedge and a scarecrow in the field behind it. He wandered on disconsolately, deciding to begin his career as a beggar at the first sign of human habitation. At last he discovered a pair of iron gates through the dusk, and assuming an expression of patient suffering calculated to melt a heart of stone, walked up the drive. At the front door he smoothed down his hair. He had lost his cap on the way. Back in these days, schoolboys used to wear caps. And you'll see in the cover illustration up there's William's got a cap on. That blue and white thing is a cap. If you're looking at it on a phone, it won't be very obvious. He pulled up his stockings, that's his socks, and rang the bell. After an interval, a stout gentleman in the garb of a butler opened the door and glared ferociously up and down William. I just want to check what the title was again. Okay. Please, began William plaintively. The stout gentleman interrupted. If you're the new Boots, he said majestically, go round to the back door. If you're not, go away. And there's a picture of the butler talking to William at the door. He then shut the door in William's face. William, on the top step, considered the question for a few minutes. It was dark and cold, with every prospect of becoming darker and colder. He decided to be the new Boots. Boots was a job, the boot boy, the person who took the boots from the household members. They would leave the boots outside their bedroom doors if it were, well, that's the way it's done in a hotel. Some of the big houses, that was how it was done. Other ones, you went to the rooms and they would have their boots put in a certain place. And the job was to clean all the mud off them and things like that, and then polish them. Except that they didn't have boot polish like we have boot polish now, or shoe polish. It was a mixture that was usually made up at the house, and it wasn't necessarily as easy to apply as the boot polish that we use these days. And it probably didn't give as good a finish either, because we've done all the chemical analysis, blah, 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 and all that sort of thing. So the boots was the name of the job of the person who did that sort of thing for the house. It was usually a young boy, and he had his board and lodging at the house as part of his pay. And you didn't call him by name, you called him by his job title, Boots. Anyway, so he decided to be the new Boots. He found his way round to the back door and knocked firmly. It was opened by a large woman in a print dress and apron. "What do you want?" she said aggressively. "He said," said William firmly, "to come round if I was the new Boots." The woman surveyed him in grim disapproval. Let's try that again. I did get there, but it wasn't good. The woman surveyed him in grim disapproval. "You been round to the front?" she said. "Nerve." Her disapproval increased to suspicion. "Where's your things?" she said. "Come in," said William without a moment's hesitation. "Too tired to bring 'em with you?" she said sarcastically. "All right, come in." William came in gratefully. It was a large, warm, clean kitchen. A small kitchen maid was peeling potatoes in a sink, and a housemaid in black, with a frilled cap and apron, was powdering her nose before a glass on the wall. That's a mirror. They both turned to stare at William. "Here's the new Boots," announced cook. "His valet's bringing his things later." The housemaid looked up William from his muddy boots to his untidy hair, then down William from his untidy hair to his muddy boots. "Impudent-looking child," she commented haughtily, returning to her task. William decided inwardly that she was to have no share at all in nuggets. The kitchen maid giggled and winked at William with obviously friendly intent. William mentally promised her half a shipload of nuggets. "Now then, Smutty," said the housemaid without turning round, "none of your sauce." "Add your tea," said the cook to William. William's spirits rose. "No," he said plaintively. "All right, sit down at the table." William's spirits soared sky high. He sat at the table, and the cook put a large plate of bread and butter before him. William set to work at once. The housemaid regarded him scornfully. "Learnt his way of eating at the zoo," she said pityingly. The kitchen maid giggled again and gave William another wink. William had given himself up to wholehearted Epicurean enjoying of his bread and butter, and took no notice of them. At this moment the butler entered. He subjected the quite unmoved William to another long survey. "When next you come a-hentering of this house, my boy," he said, "kindly remember that the front door is reserved for gentry and the back for brats." William merely looked at him coldly over a hunk of bread and butter. Mentally, he knocked him off the list of nugget receivers. The butler looked sadly round the room. "They're all the same," he lamented. "Eat, eat, eat, nothing but eat. Eat all day and eat all night. He's not been in the house 2 minutes, and he's at it. Eat, eat, eat. He'll have all the buttons bust off his uniform in a week, like what the last one had. Like eating better than working, don't you?" he said sarcastically to William. "Yes, I do too," said William with firm conviction. The kitchen maid giggled again, and the housemaid gave a sigh, expressive of scorn and weariness, as she drew a thin pencil over her eyebrows. "Well, if you've quite finished, my lord," said the butler in ponderous irony, "I'll show you to your room." William indicated that he had quite finished, and was led up to a very small bedroom. Over a chair lay a page's uniform with the conventional row of brass buttons down the front of the coat. "Togs," explained the butler briefly. "Your togs. Fix 'em on quick as you can. There's company to dinner tonight." So boots would often help out with other menial servant tasks, obviously. And togs is another... in New Zealand, togs, when I was growing up, togs is what you called your bathing costume. But togs is a slang term for the appropriate outfit for the particular situation for that particular class of people. Not everybody used it, but yes, that's how the butler is using it here. William fixed them on. "You're smaller than what the last one was," said the butler critically. "They hang loose a bit. Never mind. Within a week or two of stuffing, you'll have probably bust 'em. So it's as well to hang loose first. Now come on. Who's bringing over your things?" A friend," explained William. "I suppose it is a bit too much to expect you to carry your own parcels," went on the butler. "In these here days, bloomin' Bolshevist, I spec, aren't you?" Communist. Future communist. The Bolshevists. William condescended to explain himself. "I'm a gold digger," he said. "Crikey," said the butler. Gold digger has a different term for adults than what it does for children. William was led down again to the kitchen. The butler threw open a door that led to a small pantry. "This here is where you work, and this here," pointing to a large kitchen, "is where you live. You have not," he ended haughtily, "the hentry into the servants' hall." It's a certain class would put H's in front of their words because they naturally dropped them, as you've discovered. This ear, instead of this here. But unfortunately would put it in front of the wrong words. The hentry into the servants' hall. The entry into the servants' hall. So we'll carry on. "Crumbs," said William. "You might as well begin at once," went on the butler. "There's all this lunch's knives to clean. Here's a apron, here's the knife board, and here's the knife powder." He shut the bewildered William into the small pantry and turned to the cook. "What do you think of him?" he said. "He looks," said the cook gloomily, "the sort of boy we'll have trouble with." "Not much class," said the housemaid, arranging her frilled apron. "It surprises me how any creature like a boy can grow into an experienced, sensible, broad-minded man like you, Mr. Biggs." Mr. Biggs simpered and straightened his necktie. "Well," he admitted, "as a boy, of course, I wasn't like him." Here the pantry door opened and William's face, plentifully adorned with knife powder, came round. "I've done some of the knives," he said. "Shall I be doing something else and finish the others afterwards?" "How many have you done?" said Mr. Biggs. "One or two," said William vaguely, then with a concession of accuracy. "Well, two, but I'm feeling tired of doing knives." The kitchen maid emitted a scream of delight and the cook heaved a deep sigh. The butler advanced slowly and majestically towards William's tousled head, which was still craning around the pantry door. "You'll finish them knives, my boy," he said, "or—" William considered the weight and size of Mr. Biggs. "All right," he said pacifically. "I'll finish the knives." He disappeared, closing the pantry door behind him. Knife powder is... how to explain it? You know how you can get a liquid that's gritty for scrubbing the sink with? In New Zealand we have one and it's called jevvv. In other countries it's called sif or kif. I'm not quite sure which, but whatever. When I was growing up, we didn't have that. We had something else called vim, for vim and vigour type vim. And it was a powder which jevvv replaced. And you sprinkled it on something and then like the bottom of the sink, the stainless steel sink, which sometimes had tea stains on from emptying the teapot into it and stuff like that. And you scrubbed hard with this powder on a damp cloth and it would take all those tea stains off. And I'm thinking that knife powder is something similar because the knives would probably not stainless steel, they were probably normal steel, and if they're left a little bit too damp, they actually get a slight rust coating, and so the knife powder would help to polish them so that they're shiny as well as clean looking. Just one of the jobs that people used to have. And they would have had a bone handle instead of a metal handle, unlike forks and that sort of thing. And so therefore they couldn't be just dropped into the dishwater and left in there, because if you do that with a bone handled knife, it spoils the bone handle. It gets all dry and dusty looking and starts to shrink and things like that. And this is the cutlery that's used on the table of the owners of the house, and so they want it all to look nice all the time, but they don't actually understand what's involved to keep it that way. This is just how it's done. Anyway, carrying on. So that's the knives and the knife powder, which he seems to somehow have got on his face. I'm guessing he was playing. All right, he said pacifically. I'll finish the knives. He disappeared, closing the pantry door behind him. He's going to be a trial, said the cook, and no mistake. Trial's hardly the word, said Mr. Biggs. Affliction, supplied the housemaid. That's more like it, said Mr. Biggs. Here, William's head appeared again. What time's supper? He said. He retired precipitately at a hysterical shriek from the kitchen maid and a roar of fury from the butler. You'd better go and do your potatoes in the pantry, said the cook to the kitchen maid, and let's have a bit of peace in here and see he's doing of his work all right. The kitchen maid departed joyfully to the pantry. William was sitting by the table, idly toying with a knife. He had experimented upon the knife powder by mixing it with water, and the little brown pies that were the result lay in a row on the mantelpiece. He had also tasted it, as the dark stains upon his lips testified. His hair was standing straight up on his head, as it always did, when life was strenuous. He began the conversation. You'd be surprised, he said, if you knew what I really was. She giggled. Go on, she said. What are you? I'm a gold digger, he said. I've got shiploads and shiploads of gold. At least I will have soon. I'm not going to give him, pointing towards the door, nor any of them in there. What about me? Said the kitchen maid, winking at the cat as the only third person to be let into the joke. You, said William graciously, shall have a whole lot of nuggets. Look here. With a princely flourish he took up a knife and cut off 3 buttons from the middle of his coat and gave them to her. You keep those, and they'll be kind of tokens, see? When I come home rich, you show me the buttons and I'll remember and give you the nuggets, see? I'll maybe marry you, he promised, if I've not married anyone else. The kitchen maid put her head round the pantry door. He's loony, she said. It's lovely listening to him talking. Further conversation was prevented by the ringing of the front doorbell and the arrival of the company, which is the guests. Mr. Biggs and the housemaid departed to do the honours. The kitchen maid ran to help with the dishing up, and William was left sitting on the pantry table, idly making patterns in knife powder with his fingers. So here's a picture in the book. Oops, my phone's falling off its perch. No, that doesn't mean dying. The kitchen maid peeling and William looking rather grimy, because he does tend to experiment with things, sitting at the table talking to her. I'm a gold digger, he says, and she thinks it's hilarious. What was idly making patterns in knife powder with his finger? So this is obviously not all of the knife powder got made into those pies. What was he doing? Said the cook to the kitchen maid. Nothing, except talking, said the kitchen maid. He's a cure, he is, she added. If you've finished the knives, called out the cook, there's some boots and shoes on the floor to be done, brushes and blacking on the shelf. William arose with alacrity, that means quickly. He thought boots would be more interesting than knives. He carefully concealed the pile of uncleaned knives behind the knife box and began on the shoes. The butler returned. Soup ready, he said. The company's just going to the dining room. A pal of the master's. Decent-looking bloke, he added patronisingly. William, in his pantry, had covered a brush very thickly with blacking and was putting it in heavy layers on the boots and shoes. A large part of it adhered to his own hands. The butler looked in at him. What's happened to your buttons? He said sternly. Come off, said William. Bust off, corrected the butler. I said so soon as I saw you. I said you'd have eat your buttons bust off in a week. Well, you've eaten bust off in 10 minutes. Eaten and destroying of his clothes, he said gloomily, Returning to the kitchen, "It's all boys ever do, eating and destroying of their clothes." He went out with the soup, and William was left with the boots. He was getting tired of boots. He'd covered them all thickly with blacking, and he didn't know what to do next. Then suddenly he remembered his balloon in his pocket upstairs. It might serve to vary the monotony of his life. He slipped quietly upstairs for it, and then returned to his boots. Soon Mr. Biggs and the housemaid returned with the empty soup plates. Then through the kitchen resounded a high-pitched squeal, dying away slowly and shrilly. The housemaid screamed. "Look," said the cook, "someone's a torturing of the poor cat to death. It'll be that blessed boy." The butler advanced manfully and opened the pantry door. William stood holding in one hand an inflated balloon with the cardboard head and legs of a duck. The butler approached him. "If you let off that there thing once more, you little varmint," he said, "I'll—" Threateningly, he had advanced his large expanse of countenance very close to William's. Acting upon a sudden, uncontrollable impulse, William took up the brush, thickly smeared with blacking, and pushed back Mr. Biggs's face with it. There was a moment's silence of sheer horror. Then Mr. Biggs hurled himself furiously upon William. And here we have a break in the story. In the dining room sat the master and mistress of the house and their guest. "Did the new boots arrive?" said the master to his wife. Oh, and there he is. There's William shoving the brush into the butler's face. "Yes," she said. "Any good?" he said. "He doesn't seem to have impressed Biggs very favourably," she said, "but they never do." "The human boy," said the guest, "is given us as a discipline. I possess one, though he is my own son. I find it difficult to describe the atmosphere of peace and relief that pervades the house when he is out of it." "I'd like to meet your son," said the host. I'm getting a sinking feeling about this. You probably will sooner or later," said the guest gloomily. "Everyone in the neighbourhood meets him sooner or later. He does not hide his light under a bushel. Personally, I prefer people who haven't met him. They can't judge me by him." At this moment, the butler came in with a note. "No answer," he said, and departed with his slow dignity. "Excuse me," said the lady as she opened it. "It's from my sister. I hope," she read, "that you aren't inconvenienced much by the non-arrival of the boots I engaged for you." "He's got flu." "But he's come," she said wonderingly. There came the sound of an angry shout, a distant scream, and the clattering of heavy running footsteps, growing nearer. "A revolution, I expect," said the guest wearily. "The Reds are upon us." At that moment the door was burst open, and in rushed a boy with a blacking brush in one hand and an inflated balloon in the other. He was much dishevelled, with 3 buttons off the front of his uniform, and his face streaked with knife powder and blacking. Behind him ran a fat butler, his face purple with fury beneath a large smear of blacking. The boy rushed round the table, slipped on the polished floor, clutched desperately at the neck of the guest, bringing both guest and chair down upon the floor beside him. In a sudden silence of utter, paralysed horror, guest and boy sat on the floor and stared at each other. Then the boy's nerveless hand relaxed its hold upon the balloon, which had somehow or other survived the vicissitudes of the flight, and a shrill squeak rang through the silence of the room. The master and mistress of the house sat looking round in dazed astonishment. As the guest looked at the boy, there appeared on his countenance amazement, then incredulity, and finally frozen horror. As the boy looked at the guest, there appeared on his countenance amazement, then incredulity, and finally blank dejection. "Good Lord," said the guest, "it's William!" Oh, crumbs, said the boots. It's father. And that's the end of that chapter. And I'm going to have a drink of water and something to eat. Are you? Did you see it coming? How far out did you see it coming? Oh, what a laugh. It was an opportunity. He took the opportunity, although he doesn't stay focused for long enough to make an opportunity work quite the way it's meant to, does he? So, what have you been up to recently? Anything interesting? I have. I've been making not overlay screens, but headers. The picture that's in the background when you come to my Twitch channel, and the picture that's on my background when you go to the chat page of my Twitch channel if I'm not reading out loud, if I'm not live. They're two different pictures, and I had to come up with something, so it's like... So I've come up with the phrase, reading is magic, and put coloured flames coming up from the book and in the background in front of the library. Just to give you that idea. I can always do something else and change it at some other stage, but there you go. So it just uses the same purple that I use in my Storytime logo up the top there, words up the top there. And I will eventually do a different version of my overlay. We'll see how we go with that. And for those who didn't know, I've actually finally managed to get to affiliate level on Twitch, which means, what does it mean? Not a lot. I won't be making any money off it anyway because there's so many people who stream. But what it does mean is if you ever subscribe to my Twitch channel, then you will get the use of Twitch emotes. At the moment, I've only got one there, but and it will be improved at some stage. I am going to redo it, but I will do some more as well. So you'll get the chance of being able to use those. And also, it means that if you're part of our Discord server, in theory, I don't know if it works yet, I will be having a look later on, Twitch announcements should be made over in the Discord server so that people who happen to be in the Discord server at the time see when I go live on Twitch. I am actually going to give you my Discord server link, which is in my profile below the screen, but I'll give it to you anyway. And there you go. So the Discord server, it's a bit like an old-fashioned bulletin board. You can chat in the chat channel there, but also there are other channels for the different books. I haven't made one for Just William yet, but I will do, and I will put some of the illustrations I've found from the Just William books in there. And if there's anything else I find that's interesting or relevant, I'll put that there. And if you find out anything interesting or relevant about Just William, or any of the other Just William books about William, or about the author, or about the time period that they were set in and the world that they lived in at the time, feel free to share them in the appropriate channel. The same goes for any other one. We will make some more channels. I've done one for Heidi, which has got some illustrations in it. We're going to do other channels for the other books that I have read and will be reading. And please contribute. Come and be part of it. It's very quiet at the moment, so it's not going to take a lot of your time with getting distracted by other chat. But there you go. Anyway, we're going to carry on reading because we are going to read chapter 4. So I'm Jev, and I am reading Just William by Richmal Crompton. And I tell you that because some of you start halfway through me reading. And we are now reading chapter 4, The Fall of the Idol, I-D-O-L, like something that people worship. William was bored. He sat at his desk in the sunny schoolroom and gazed dispassionately at a row of figures on the blackboard. "It isn't sense," he murmured scornfully. Yes, that's the way he murmured. He murmured scornfully. Sorry, I was just checking the time. Murmured scornfully. Miss Drew was also bored, but unlike William, She tried to hide the fact. I'm guessing Miss Drew is the teacher. If the interest on £100 for 1 year is £5, she said wearily, then, William Brown, do sit up and don't look so stupid. William changed his position from that of lolling over one side of his desk to that of lolling over the other and began to justify himself. Well, I can't understand any of it. It's enough to make anyone look stupid when he can't understand it. I can't think why people go on giving people bits of money for giving them lots of money and go on doing it. It don't seem sense. Anyone's a mug for giving anyone £100 just because he says he'll go on giving him £5 and go on sticking to his £100. How does he know he will? Well, he warmed to his subject. What's to stop him not giving any £5 once he's got hold of the £100 and going on sticking to the £100? That's confusing. Miss Drew checked him by a slim, upraised hand. William, she said patiently, just listen to me. Now suppose, her eyes roved around the room and settled on a small red-haired boy. Suppose that Eric wanted £100 for something and you lent it to him. I want then Eric £100, he said firmly, because I hadn't got it. I've only got three threepence halfpenny, and I won't lend that to Eric because I'm not such a mug, because I lent him my mouth organ once and he bit off and... Miss Drew interrupted sharply. Teaching on a hot afternoon is rather trying. You'd better stay in after school, William, and I'll explain. William scowled, emitted his monosyllable of scornful disdain, and relapsed into gloom. He brightened, however, on remembering a lizard he had caught on the way to school and drew it from its hiding place in his pocket. But the lizard had abandoned the unequal struggle for existence among the stones, top, penknife, bits of putty, and other small objects that inhabited William's pocket. The housing problem had been too much for it. William, in disgust, shrouded the remains in blotting paper and disposed of it in his neighbour's ink pot. The neighbour protested, and an enlivening scrimmage ensued. Finally, the lizard was dropped down the neck of an inveterate enemy of William's in the next row, and was extracted only with the help of obliging friends. Threats of vengeance followed, couched in blood-curdling terms and written on blotting paper. Meanwhile, Miss Drew explained simple practice. That's capitalised, so it's obviously a mathematical term, which I've never heard of, to a small but earnest coterie of admirers in the front row, and William, in the back row, whiled away the hours for which his father paid the education authorities a substantial sum. But his turn was to come. At the end of afternoon school, one by one the class departed, leaving William only nonchalantly chewing an India rubber and glaring at Miss Drew. What we call an eraser used to be called an India rubber. It's made out of rubber from a rubber tree in India, and it removes pencil marks from paper. Kind of. Not particularly well. Now, William, Miss Drew was severely patient. William went up to the platform and stood by her desk. So old-fashioned classrooms, you'd have a blackboard across the front wall, and then in front of the blackboard there was a platform that was about one step above the the rest of the floor, and it was probably, a metre and a half wide, 4.5 feet wide, I think. Enough room for the teacher to be able to walk backwards and forwards on and write on the blackboard without falling off and without expecting to fall off. And it means that if you've got older students that are quite tall, the ones at the back can still see over the heads of the others because the teacher is up a little higher. It also means that the students can see to the blackboard because the blackboard is at the right height for the platform. And the teacher's desk is usually next to it, one end of the platform, or on top of one end of the platform. So that's the platform. You see, William went up to the platform and stood by her desk. You see, if someone borrows £100 from someone else, she wrote down the figures on a piece of paper, bending low over her desk. The sun poured in through the window, showing the little golden curls in the nape of her neck. She lifted to William's eyes that were stern. She lifted to William eyes that were stern and frowning, but blue as blue above flushed cheeks, because she's got the sun shining on her and she's hot and she's a bit cross. "Don't you see, William?" she said. There was a faint perfume about her, and William, the devil-may-care pirate and robber chief, the stern despiser of all things effeminate, felt the first dart of the malicious blind god. He blushed and simpered. The blind god. Valentine, a saint, a blind man who was martyred. Cupid, associated with. So there you go. Blind Cupid, firing arrows to cause desire and affection between people, but firing blindly, so you just randomly ended up falling in love with somebody. So you've got two aspects of the visual picture. Anyway, "Yes, I see all about it now," he assured her. "You've explained it all plain now. I couldn't understand it before. It's a bit soft, isn't it? Anyway, to go lending £100 just 'cause someone says they'll give you £5 next year. Some folks is mugs, but I do understand it now. I couldn't understand it before." Here's William standing next to the teacher at her desk at the front of the class. "You'd have found it simpler if you hadn't played with dead lizards all the time," she said wearily, closing her books. William gasped. He went home, her devoted slave. Certain members of the class always deposited dainty bouquets on her desk in the morning. William was determined to outshine the rest. He went into the garden with a large basket and a pair of scissors the next morning before he set out for school. It happened that no one was about. He went first to the hothouse. It was a riot of colour. He worked there with a thoroughness and concentration worthy of a nobler cause. He came out staggering beneath a piled-up basket of hothouse blooms. The hothouse itself was bare and desolate. Oh dear, there's trouble coming. Hearing a sound in the back garden, he hastily decided to delay no longer, but set out to school at once. He set out as unostentatiously as possible. In other words, not doing anything fancy. Miss Drew, entering her classroom, was aghast to see, instead of the usual small array of buttonholes, that's tiny little bunches of flowers that you put in a little wee clip on the front of your dress, or if you're a gentleman with a suit, you have a little hole there, a buttonhole, that's specially put there for putting a flower through. The usual small array of buttonholes on her desk, a mass of already withering hothouse flowers completely covering her desk and chair. William was a boy who never did things by halves. "Good heavens!" she cried in consternation. William blushed with pleasure. He changed his seat to one in the front row. All that morning he sat, his eyes fixed on her earnestly, dreaming of moments in which he rescued her from robbers and pirates. Here he was somewhat inconsistent with his own favourite role of robber chief and pirate, and bore her fainting in his strong arms to safety. Then she clung to him in love and gratitude, and they were married at once by the Archbishops of Canterbury and York. William would have no half measures. They were to be married by the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, or else the Pope. He wasn't sure that he wouldn't rather have the Pope. He would wear his black pirate suit with the skull and crossbones. No, that would not do. "What have I just been saying, William?" said Miss Drew. William coughed and gazed at her soulfully. "About lending money," he said hopefully. "William," she snapped, "this isn't arithmetic and isn't an arithmetic lesson. I'm trying to teach you about the Armada." "Oh, that," said William brightly and ingratiatingly. "Oh, yes." "Tell me something about it." "I don't know anything, not just yet." I've been telling you about it. I do wish you'd listen, she said despairingly. William relapsed into silence, nonplussed but by no means cowed. When he reached home that evening, he found that the kitchen was the scene of excitement and hubbub. One policeman was measuring the panes of glass in the conservatory door, and another was on his knees examining the beds near. His grown-up sister Ethel was standing at the front door. "Every single flower has been stolen from the conservatory sometime this morning," she said excitedly. "We've only just been able to get the police. William, did you see anyone about when you went to school this morning?" William pondered deeply. His most guileless and innocent expression came to his face. "No," he said at last. "No, Ethel, I didn't see nobody." William coughed and discreetly withdrew. That evening he settled down at the library table, spreading out his books around him, a determined frown upon his small face. His father was sitting in an armchair by the window, reading the evening paper. "Father," said William suddenly, "suppose I came to you and said you was to give me £100 and I'd give you £5 next year, and so on. Would you give it to me?" "I should not, my son," said his father firmly. William sighed. "I knew there was something wrong with it," he said. Mr. Brown returned to the leading article, but not for long. "Father, what was the date of the Armada?" "Good heavens, how should I know? I wasn't there." William sighed. "Well, I'm trying to write about it and why it failed. And why did it fail?" Mr. Brown groaned and gathered up his paper and retired to the dining room. He had almost finished reading the leading article when William appeared, his arms full of books, and sat down quietly at the table. "Father, what's the French for 'my aunt is walking in the garden'?" "What on earth are you doing?" said Mr. Brown irritably. "I'm doing my home lessons." "We call that homework," said William virtuously. "I never knew you had the things to do." "No," William admitted gently. "I don't generally take much bother over them, but I'm going to now, 'cause Miss Drew—" he blushed slightly and paused. "'Cause Miss Drew—" he blushed more deeply and began to stammer. "'Cause Miss Drew—" he was almost apoplectic. Mr. Brown quietly gathered up his paper and crept out to the veranda where his wife sat with the week's mending. "William's gone raving mad in the dining room," he said pleasantly as he sat down. "Takes the form of a wild thirst for knowledge and a babbling of a misdrawing or Drew or something. He's best left alone." Mrs. Brown merely smiled placidly over the mending. I'm guessing she's darning socks. Mr. Brown had finished one leading article and begun another before William appeared again. He stood in the doorway, frowning and stern. "Father, what's the capital of Holland?" "Good heavens," said his father. "Buy him an encyclopedia. Anything. What does he think I am? What?" "I'd better set apart a special room for his homework," said Mrs. Brown soothingly, "now that he's beginning to take such an interest." "A room," echoed his father bitterly. "He wants a whole house." Miss Drew was surprised and touched by William's earnestness and attention the next day. At the end of the afternoon school, that means after having gone home for lunch and then going back again, they refer to that as afternoon school. He kindly offered to carry her books home for her. He waved aside all protests. He marched home by her side, discoursing pleasantly, his small freckled face beaming devotion. "I like pirates, don't you, Miss Drew? And robbers and things like that. Miss Drew, would you like to be married to a robber?" He was trying to reconcile his old beloved dream of his future estate with the new one of becoming Miss Drew's husband. "No," she said firmly. His heart sank. "Nor a pirate," he said sadly. "No. They're quite nice, really, pirates," he assured her. "I think not." "Well," he said resignedly, "we'll just have to go hunting wild animals and things. That'll be all right." "Who?" she said bewilderedly. "Well, just you wait," he said darkly. "Then, would you rather be married by the Archbishop of York or the Pope?" "The Archbishop, I think," she said gravely. He nodded. All right. She was distinctly amused. She was less amused the next evening. Miss Drew had a male cousin, a very nice-looking male cousin, with whom she often went for walks in the evening. This evening, by chance, they passed William's house, and William, who was in the garden, threw aside his temporary role of pirate and joined them. He trotted happily on the other side of Miss Drew. He entirely monopolized the conversation. The male cousin seemed to encourage him, and this annoyed Miss Drew. He refused to depart, in spite of Miss Drew's strong hints. He had various items of interest to impart, and he imparted them with the air of one assured of an appreciative hearing. He had found a dead rat the day before, and given it to his dog. But his dog didn't like him dead, neither did the old cat, so he'd buried it. Did Miss Drew like all those flowers he'd got her the other day? He was afraid that he couldn't bring any more like that just yet. Were there pirates now? Well, what would folks do to one if there was one? He didn't see why there shouldn't be pirates now. He thought he'd start it anyway. He'd like to shoot a lion. He was going to one day. He'd shoot a lion and a tiger. He'd bring the skin home to Miss Drew if she liked. He grew recklessly generous. He'd bring home lots of skins of all sorts of animals for Miss Drew. Back in those days, it was considered okay to go hunting wild animals, and you saved the skin and used it as a rug or as a trophy. So that's just talking from the point of view of the way things were perceived in those days. Don't you think you ought to be going home, William? Said Miss Drew coldly. William hastened to reassure her. Oh, no, not for ever so long yet, he said. Here they are sitting on a bench, Miss Drew in the middle, and her cousin, quite amused, and William sharing his information. There you go. So you've got William and Miss Drew and the distant cousin. Oh, no, not for ever so long yet, he said. Isn't it your bedtime? Oh, no, not yet, not for ever so long. Male cousin was giving William his whole attention. What does Miss Drew teach you at school, William? Oh, just ornery things, armadas and things, and about lending £100. That's an awful soft thing. I understand it, he said hastily, fearing further explanation. But it's soft. Soft. My father thinks it is too, and he ought to know. He's been abroad lots of times. He's been chased by a bull, my father has. The shades of night were drawing fast when William reached Miss Drew's house, still discoursing volubly. He was drunk with success. He interpreted his idol's silence as the silence of rapt admiration. He was passing through the gate with his two companions, with the air of one assured of welcome, when Miss Drew shut the gate upon him firmly. You'd better go home now, William, she said. William hesitated. I don't mind coming in a bit, he said. I'm not tired. But Miss Drew and the male cousin were already halfway up the walk. William turned his steps homeward. He met Ethel near the gate. William, where have you been? I've been looking for you everywhere. It's hours past your bedtime. I was going a walk with Miss Drew, but you should have come home at your bedtime. I don't think she wanted me to go, he said with dignity. I think it wouldn't have been polite. William found that a new and serious element had entered his life. It was not without its disadvantages. Many had been the little diversions by which William had been wont to while away the hours of instruction. In spite of his devotion to Miss Drew, he missed the old days of carefree exuberance, but he kept his new seat in the front row and clung to his role of earnest student. He was beginning to find also that a conscientious performance of home lessons limited his activities after school hours, but at present he hugged his chains. Miss Drew, from her seat on the platform, found William's soulful, concentrated gaze somewhat embarrassing, and his questions even more so. As he went out of school, he heard her talking to another mistress. I'm very fond of syringa, she was saying. I'd love to have some. William decided to bring her syringa, handfuls of syringa, armfuls of syringa. He went straight home to the gardener. No, I ain't got no syringia. Please step off my rose bed, Mr. William. No, there ain't any syringia in this here garden. I dunno for why. Please leave my hose pipe alone, Mr. William. Huh, ejaculated William, scornfully turning away. He went round the garden. The gardener had been quite right. There were guelder roses everywhere, but no syringia. So obviously he knows what it is. It's a particular flowering plant. He climbed the fence and surveyed the next garden. There were guelder roses everywhere, but no syringia. Sorry, itchy nose. It happens every time, doesn't it? You can look it up while you're listening. What does syringia look like? I'm guessing I'm saying it right. That's the way I've always said it. There were guelder roses everywhere. That's the other one you can look up. Guelder rose. Guelder. It must have been some peculiarity of the soil. In the soil. William strolled down the road, scanning the gardens as he went. All had guelder roses. None had syringia. Suddenly he stopped. On a table in the window of a small house at the bottom of the road was a vase of syringia. He did not know who lived there. He entered the garden cautiously. No one was about. He looked into the room. It was empty. The window was open at the bottom. He scrambled in, removing several layers of white paint from the windowsill as he did so. I'm guessing it's his boots. He was determined to have that syringia. He took it dripping from the vase and was preparing to depart when the door opened and a fat woman appeared upon the threshold. The scream that she emitted at the sight of William curdled the very blood in his veins. Sorry, hang on a minute. Okay, right. Curdled the very blood in his veins. She dashed to the window, and William, in self-defence, dodged round the table and out of the door. The back door was open, and William blindly fled by it. The fat woman did not pursue. She was leaning out of the window, and her shrieks rent the air. Police! Help! Murder! Robbers! The quiet little street rang with the raucous sounds. William felt cold shivers creeping up and down his spine. He was in a small back garden from which he could see no exit. Meanwhile, the shrieks were redoubled. Here he is, with the plant in his hand, and the woman has come into the room and seen him and starts to shriek. Help! 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 Then came sounds of the front door opening and men's voices. Hello! Who is it? What is it? William glared round wildly. There was a hen house in the corner of the garden, and into this he dashed, tearing open the door and plunging through a mass of flying feathers and angry, disturbed hens. William crouched in a corner of the dark hen house, determinedly clutching his bunch of syringia. Distant voices were at first all he could hear. Then they came nearer, and he heard the fat lady's voice loudly declaiming. He was quite a small man, but with such an evil face. I just had one glimpse of him as he dashed past me. I'm sure he'd have murdered me if I hadn't cried for help. Oh, the coward! And a poor defenceless woman. He was standing by the silver table. I disturbed him at his work of crime. I feel so upset I shan't sleep for nights. I shall see his evil, murderous face, and a poor, unarmed woman. Can you give us no details, madam? Said a man's voice. Could you recognise him again? Anywhere, she said firmly. Such a criminal face. You've no idea how upset I am. I might have been a lifeless corpse now if I hadn't had the courage to cry for help. We're measuring the footprints, madam. You say he went out by the front door. I'm convinced he did. I'm convinced he's hiding in the bushes by the gate. Such a low face. My nerves are absolutely jarred. We'll search the bushes again, madam, said the other voice wearily, but I expect he has escaped by now. Yes, if that was the front yard and they're in the backyard. If there was an intruder in the bushes, they would have been long gone. The brute, said the fat lady. Oh, the brute! And that face! If I hadn't had the courage to cry out. The voices died away, and William was left alone in a corner of the hen house. A white hen appeared in the little doorway, squawked at him angrily and retired, cackling indignation. Visions of lifelong penal servitude or hanging passed before William's eyes. He'd rather be executed, really. He hoped they'd execute him. Then he heard the fat lady bidding good-bye to the policeman. Then she came to the back garden, evidently with a friend, and continued to pour forth her troubles. And he dashed past me, dear, quite a small man, but with such an evil face. A black hen appeared in the little doorway, and with an angry squawk at William, returned to the back garden. I think you're splendid, dear, said the invisible friend. How you had the courage. The white hen gave a sardonic scream. You'd better come in and rest, darling, said the friend. I'd better, said the fat lady in a plaintive, suffering voice. I do feel very shaken. Their voices ceased. The door was closed, and all was still. Cautiously, very cautiously, a much dishevelled William crept from the hen house and round the side of the house. Here he found a locked side gate over which he climbed, and very quietly he glided down to the front gate and to the road. Where's William this evening? Said Miss Brown. I do hope he won't stay out after his bedtime. Oh, I've just met him, said Ethel. He was going up to his bedroom. He was covered with hen feathers and holding a bunch of syringia. Mad, sighed his father. Mad, mad, mad. The next morning, William laid a bunch of syringia upon Miss Drew's desk. He performed the offering with an air of quiet, manly pride. Miss Drew recoiled. Not syringia, William. I simply can't bear the smell. I wonder if that's Lily of the Valley. William gazed at her in silent astonishment for a few moments. Then, but you said you were fond of syringia and you'd like to have them. Did I say syringia? Said Miss Drew vaguely. I meant guelder roses. William's gaze was one of stony contempt. He went slowly back to his old seat at the back of the room. That evening he made a bonfire with several choice friends and played Red Indians in the garden. There was a certain thrill in returning to the old life. Hello, said his father, encountering William creeping on all fours among the bushes. I thought you did home lessons now. William arose to an upright position. I'm not going to take much bother over him now, said William. Miss Drew, she can't talk straight. She don't know what she means. That's always the trouble with William, agreed his father. With women, agreed his father. William says his idol has feet of clay, he said to his wife, who had approached. I don't know as she's got feet of clay, said William, the literal. All I can say is she can't talk straight. I took no end of trouble, and she don't know what she means. I think her feet's all right. She walks all right. Besides, when they make folk false feet, they make 'em of wood, not clay. And that's the end of that chapter. And I'm stopping there because this is a book of long chapters. There you go. The next chapter is called The Show. Indeed. What will that one be about? I wonder if that's like our A&P shows in New Zealand. Agriculture and Produce is what the name is originally. We just call them the A&P show. Farmers and gardeners and housewives and children grow things and make things and bake things, and children make sand gardens in a little saucer and put flowers in them to make it look like a scene. There's prizes for the strangest looking vegetable, and you make vegetable animals. That's another one, is you take various fruits and vegetables and things like toothpicks and stuff like that, and you put them together and you make it into a creature. I wonder if it's that sort of a show. Don't know. We'll find out next time, I guess, won't we? So for those of you who are watching this over on Twitch, I'm going to give you my YouTube channel. Just because there you can catch up on other stories I've read. And they're put into playlists. And if you subscribe and then also click on the bell icon, YouTube will notify you every time I put up a new one. So there you go, you won't miss out. Just like if you follow me here on Twitch, Twitch will also notify you when I go live. so you won't miss out. So I look forward to seeing you over in our Discord server. And if you're on YouTube, that's wonderful. I'm glad you're enjoying listening. Don't forget to leave a comment if you're enjoying one of the stories. If there's anything in particular that really amuses you, point it out, because people often forget different parts of the story when they see the title, but when they see people's comments about it, they go, hang on a minute, I think I remember something about that, and they have a listen or a read or of the books or something like that, and it adds to the shared enjoyment of the story. So please do subscribe, follow, like, whatever, and we'll see you next time. Bye.